Last week there was a formal handover of one of the most important functions of government, the early childhood development centres. Creches that care for so many young children in our country are now no longer under the care of the Department of Social Development. They're under the care now of the Department of Basic Education. Professor Atmore is the founding director at the Centre for Early Childhood Development. He's an expert on this. Professor, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. If I remember correctly, you've actually been waiting for this handover for quite a long time. Is this an important moment for the sector?
Stephen, good afternoon and good afternoon to your viewers. Yes, it is a very important moment and it's given us some renewed hope. It's been coming on since a African National Congress policy conference more than a decade ago. And about a year and a half ago, the president announced the migration. He signed the proclamation and it happened on Friday. And so we're optimistic. There are huge challenges because the Department of Social Development has left an absolute mess. But we'll work with government, with the Department of Basic Education, to put our young children first.
What do you think went wrong while they were under the control of the Department of under the control of the Department of Social Development? I mean, in some ways, during the hard lockdown, I seem to recall they were really almost just ignored, neglected, forgotten.
There are a number of things that went wrong, and that's the danger with the migration to basic education, that those same things, unless they are changed, will be in the same situation. The biggest is probably the lack of political will and the lack of government action in the interest of young children. We also had a minister who was absent from duty, and she really couldn't care less for young children. We had an inadequate budget. The data which informs us about how many early childhood centres there are, how many staff members there are, what their salaries are, so that proper planning can be done. None of that was available. And the big fear with immigration is that none of this will be corrected. Until such time as President Ramaphosa goes on national television and speaks about the importance of early childhood development, and until such time as the finance minister allocates more than the measly 1% of budget to early childhood development, I'm afraid we may end up in the same situation.
I mean, around the world there is more and more research about how important it is to get children into education earlier. And we find out more and more that far from focusing on higher education or the last year of matric as we do every year, we should really be focusing on, well, grade 1, but the years that come before grade 1. Are we just sort of going against all of this research then?
I think we are going against all of this research. You know, from 1994, when Nelson Mandela became president, there's been a lot of talk about early childhood development. And this is because of the actions and the activism of the non-profit sector pre-1994. So we were elated when early childhood development was written into various policies. The reality is that once the rubber hit the road, nothing happened. And I understand that government had all these other priorities, but, 27 years later, we still have pit latrines, we still have children not in school, we still have more than 70% of our primary school children not being able to read for meaning. And one would imagine that in 27 years, this would have been overcome. And I'm afraid that government just has not given early childhood development the priority that it needs. And that's notwithstanding Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma, Trevor Manuel, all quoting the important research and outcomes that you've just mentioned in their various political speeches. But I'm afraid a lot of it's been hot air with very little action.
It would seem to me that there may be another conversation which might start to occur in the next little while. It may already be a dynamic which happens, which is that if the Department of Basic Education currently controls schools, so they look after children from the age of grade 1. They now look after children in early childhood development centres. From an administrative point of view, it's much easier to do that if those two institutions, a primary school and an ECD, are on the same property and become one institution. I mean, it could in the end lead to a complete change of the way we manage schools, that you make primary schools start earlier. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud here. Do you think something like that could happen? Would you support something like that?
Stephen, it's ironic that you mentioned this. The Education White Paper 5, which is now 21 years old, says precisely that 85% of grade R would be in public primary schools. The reality is that we're nowhere near that. You know, the basic education has a mammoth task in front of it. There are commentators who quite rightly are saying that with the added load of pre-grade R, and we're talking 5.5, 6 million children, 32,000 early childhood development centers, and 180,000 ECD teachers, having to take that load on may push the Department of Basic Education back a few decades. And that's a possibility if there isn't a political will right from the start. So I think it's pretty simple to add a grade R class or 2 or 3 in every single public primary school, and to link an early childhood development center to that public primary school. It's an idea that is in the early stages, and it's something which we would advise the Basic Education Minister to follow up on.
Professor Eric Atmore, really appreciate the time, sir. Thank you. Founding Director at the Centre for Early Childhood Development. Do appreciate the time here on Newsfeed.